Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and this is an Empire flagellant from Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And yes, this is another one of my olden days models that I'm pulling from my pile of opportunity to enjoy after many years of sitting on a shelf. And even better than that, I'm going to practice some different techniques that I've not practiced a lot to see what I can learn and to see what I can improve. But if you think that I'm not talking about the Gaunt's ghosts for some reason, well, I have an unpleasant surprise for you, because this model will be representing Eotanni Zweil, who invites himself along with the Tanith first and only. So, what is the model? Well, as far as I remember, it's a model that came free on the cover of a White Dwarf magazine some 20 years ago, probably. I haven't found the exact issue yet, or even confirmation that it was from there. As a flagellant, it used to have a metal flail of spiked balls, which I removed quite some time ago, and recently I repaired it by adding this little flag to make a complete model. It's from the old times, when square bases weren't square, before the end times and the age of Sigmar, where square bases were considered square. Of course, this model will be used in 40k, so it's already been moved onto a 25mm round base, as nature intends. And in fact, this model is so old that as a metal model it got replaced with a plastic model kit, and the plastic model that replaced it was also put on square bases at that time. I'm sure none of you care, but with that little ramble out of the way, what's all this painting stuff going on? I'm practicing the idea of thinning acrylic paints with acrylic inks. Those few of you who watched my video on Gaunt may remember that I first tried it there. I'm far from the first person to try this out, and there's quite a few videos out there of people much more experienced than me, but I want to make my own way, try my own thing, and invent my own mistakes that I can learn from. With Gaunt I was using black paint and blue ink for his uniform. Here I'm using blue paint and blue ink, and even though I'm starting with a dark blue paint, the look is a saturated and vibrant blue. And mixing in a lighter blue into the same mix as I'm layering on upwards just makes it look all the more bright and vibrant. I usually try to position the highlights on the upper side of any fold in clothing, but in this case the folds are running straight down in a lot of cases. I could position the highlights from one side, like for example the top left, but I sort of defaulted into just painting the highest points when I was painting the model. By using a single puddle of ink and paint for all of the blue, I was mostly able to smooth the gradients of colour, but in some cases it does jump quite harshly, leaving a line between the tones quite visible. Overall, I'm really happy with the effect, and I only spent about 20 minutes on all of the blue on this whole model, before swiftly rolling on to base coating just about everything else ochre. Hair, skin, the book, the planks of wood, just about everything except the flag got this light brown, kind of slight tinge of orange base coat. And whilst I saw all of that boring stuff out, let's quickly mention the character and the model. Zweil is an Eotanni priest, which means he has no specific location. Imhava Eotanni will wander, sometimes for their whole lives, but commonly they will settle down to help or even take over an old decrepit chapel in the middle of nowhere. Zweil instead attached himself to an Imperial Guard regiment, one that I may have mentioned before, so settling down doesn't quite fit, but he doesn't really wander either. Except that he sort of does wander in the sense that the Tanith go wherever the next war will be, and Zweil follows along. Zweil is never depicted in any of the books draped in planks of wood and sheets of paper, but it's the nearest model I have that's even remotely close to represent the crazy old man who drivels on about slightly but totally not heretical drivel. And speaking of those papers, I've taken the exact same technique as the blue, but not in blue. Adding white to my ochre mix and highlighting up until the overall effect is that of a tea-stained old paper look. And I finished by filling in the scripted text with a black wash because it's easier than picking out each letter individually. I actually used a lot of washes on this model to differentiate different parts, brown wash on the wood, black wash on the skin, for example. I usually don't use washes a lot, but in this case I was moving pretty quickly and not really worried about spending a lot of time or effort on any particular thing, because I want to spend the time and effort on something later on. And after the washes, I mixed in some Caucasian skin tone into the ochre and finished up the skin. Running Zweil on the tabletop is something that's gone back and forth a few times over the, well, probably since the book was introduced a couple of decades ago, but I've been discussing it for the last few weeks. The easy way is to use a codex-compliant Ministorum priest, who is quite well armed and has a combat buff for units around it, but also is quite buff himself. Doesn't seem quite right for a bumbling old man like Zweil. But also the Tanith aren't really codex compliant to begin with. So what I've done as part of the Community Tanith Codex is to write up this little entry. The stat line matches his weedy frame, appropriate weaponry and a rewritten buff for nearby units makes this a far more characterful entry. Probably not as valuable on the battlefield, but that's not important. And of course this is fully unofficial, this is from a fan codex after all, but I think we're on the right track to make something that's fair and balanced overall. But that's the topic for another video. For the rest of this video, I have a flag to glow up. As I'm playing around with inks, I thought I'd try white, as white is one of those many hard colours to paint. The yellow and red inks did a wonder on yellow and red paints respectively. However, the white wasn't quite as successful as the others. It's still one of the best coats of white that I've managed with any paints I've used so far, but it's not quite perfect. I added a little of a light blue grey that I'm fond of for a second coat, which layered nicely to opaque enough, and then I went back with the white again to give it a little hint of some highlights, which gave me a nice blank canvas to do with whatever you do with a blank canvas. A friend once said, quote, "Making art feels like giving a piece of paper suggestions until it decides what it wants to be by itself," unquote. Which, whilst nearly art in sentence form all by itself, isn't quite the inspiration I needed, so I had a separate idea. One of the things that Zweil keeps going on about is Saint Sabbat, a character of great prominence in the Gaunt series, the Sabbat Worlds cluster from those books, and of course, the life of Zweil himself. So I looked up some 40k art of Saint Sabbat and some other important fancy characters of the universe and didn't really like any of it and didn't really think I'd be able to paint any of it. So instead I looked up some more simple artwork of generic robed people. And with some small specific pieces inspiring the specific parts of a practice sketch, I got some paint to the perfect consistency, my sharpest brush, and I got stuck into some freehand. Overall, the ideas of freehanding some piece of artwork or specific detail on an open area of a model are quite intimidating for many painters, but the basic concepts are very much the same as how most mini painters will paint normally. Good base coating, directional highlights, colour separation and neatness, some form of colour blending, and just a relaxed attitude to try something new. And this is my first real attempt at any full picture freehand. I have of course done the usual orky stuff of checks and dags, and the odd glyph thrown in here or there, as well as some tattoos on my Tanith. But this is a painting, or an embroidery thing? It should have been an entire bunch of details from edge to edge to look amazing on your first try, right? Well, no, it doesn't have to. Just like your dags don't have to, and your highlights don't have to, and your base coats don't have to. Nothing has to be perfect on your first try. Every model, in some cases each individual part of a model, can be a practice piece. I firmly believe that there's no such thing as a ruined model. Sure, there's endless ways to paint poorly or to end up with a model that you're not happy with, but it's not ruined. And so it is with my first foray into complex freehanding. The end result isn't quite as nice as I'd like it to be, but it's better than anything I've tried before, and I've practiced the technique. So what have I learned? Well, it turns out that my style is quite cartoony in that my skill at this type of painting can't render such immaculate blends and fine details as you might see elsewhere. That's just something that requires practice. I also noticed that I didn't fill the flag. I've painted the figure and a scroll, but the rest of the usable area is just white void, which may be realistic, but it's not the cool, over-the-top, fancy 40k style. So next time I do anything like this, I'll add in more details in my practice sketch so that I have more stuff to fill in all of that empty space on the real model. Well, I do have some more practice to do, so hopefully I'll find, or be sent, an appropriate model to do some more freehand on soon. Something outside the Tanith project most likely. And there's the lovely codger finished with just a little extra brown wash in places to cover over some imperfections. If you have anything to add, there's a comment section down below, and on your way past the description box, check out the links to the other stuff I get up to, including a donation link so that I can maybe buy a new model rather than these 20-year-old models. But with all that done, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.